May 2011. Melbourne is deep in the kind of cold midnight that makes every sound feel louder than it should. In a five-star hotel high above the city, blue and red sirens flash against the windows like a heartbeat that refuses to slow. Inside the suite, Dan Saunders stands completely still, staring down at the chaos he hoped would never arrive. He presses a shaking hand against the glass. 4 months earlier, this same man was serving drinks in a small-town bar, slipping tips into a jar to buy groceries. Now he feels the weight of an entire system closing in on him. He hears a thud in the hallway, a door shutting somewhere far too close. Then the unmistakable rhythm of boots moving with purpose. Dan backs away from the window, pulse hammering in his ears. It all feels unreal, yet every detail is brutally familiar. The sirens, the lights, the quiet march of officers coming for someone who should never have tasted the life he lived. He knows exactly why they are here. He knows exactly what started all of this. It began on a humid night in February 2011, in a quiet Australian town where nothing strange ever happens. A night when Dan, broke and slightly drunk, walked up to an ordinary ATM and found something no one was meant to see. A moment when the banking system blinked, lost sight of his balance, and opened a crack wide enough for him to step through. For months he moved money the system could not track. He flew across oceans. He spent without hesitation. He lived like a man who had discovered fire, but fire always burns back. A firm knock hits the hotel door, not rushed, not angry, just certain. Dan closes his eyes and exhales. This is the moment he has replayed in his head every night, to understand why the police are here, and why his world is collapsing in this silent room. We have to go back to where it all began. The night the ATM went blind. February 2011. Wangaratta sits under a heavy late summer night, the kind of heat that clings to your skin and makes the air feel thick. The pubs are closing and a soft buzz of drunken laughter spills into the quiet streets. Among the last people to step outside is Dan Saunders, tired, broke, and walking with the loose confidence of someone who has had just enough to drink to stop caring. He checks his wallet. A few coins. Nothing more. He needs cash if he wants to get home without stumbling for miles in the dark. So he walks toward a lonely ATM glowing at the end of the street. It hums softly to itself, like a machine half asleep. Dan slides in his worn bank card and waits for the usual disappointment. But the screen flickers. Then flickers again. A strange message appears. Balance unavailable at this time. No warning, no denial, just a blind spot. A moment where the machine does not seem to know who he is or what he has. Dan frowns at the screen, confused. For half a second, he thinks he sees his real balance, a few $100s. Then the number vanishes as if someone pulled the plug. Most people would curse the machine and walk away. But Dan hesitates. Maybe it is the alcohol, or maybe it is something deeper, a quiet curiosity waking up inside him. He selects a small transfer, moving money he knows he does not have. The machine thinks, then cancels. But the cancellation does something unexpected. It leaves the system open, unguarded, waiting for the next command. Dan swallows and chooses withdraw, $200, from a savings account that should be nearly empty. The moment he presses confirm, he hears it. A mechanical click from deep inside the machine. A counting rhythm, a soft whir. Then the cash slides out. Dan stares at the bills in his hand, as if they might evaporate. They do not. They are real, crisp, untouched. He looks up at the security camera blinking overhead, expecting alarms, expecting metal doors to slam shut, expecting something. Anything. Nothing happens. The street stays silent. The machine sits still, as if unaware of what it has done. And Dan feels a pulse of adrenaline rise through his chest. Not excitement. Not yet. Something closer to disbelief. A feeling that the world has tilted just a little, revealing a crack in the rules everyone else follows without thinking. He steps back from the ATM, heart pounding, senses sharp. The air feels colder now. He glances around, half expecting someone to emerge from the shadows demanding the money back. But there is no one. Dan pockets the cash and walks away, trying to convince himself it was a glitch, a one-time miracle that will never happen again. But the truth presses at the edges of his thoughts. Machines are not supposed to go blind. Systems are not supposed to slip. And yet this one did. And for the first time, Dan wonders what might happen if he returned. Not tomorrow. Tonight. The morning after the first glitch, Dan wakes with a dry mouth and a heavy head, expecting regret. But instead he sees the money. Real bills. Sitting on his nightstand like a secret he never asked for. His breath catches. It was not a dream. The machine really handed him cash it should have refused. With shaky fingers he calls the bank hotline. The recorded voice reads his balance in a calm, emotionless tone. Everything appears normal. No warnings. No overdraft. No alerts from the fraud team. The system accepted the impossible without a single complaint. A question forms in his mind, subtle at first, then louder. If the ATM was blind last night, will it happen again tonight? The idea lingers all day, clinging to him like a shadow he cannot shake off. By midnight he is standing on the same quiet street, gazing at the ATM glowing beneath a flickering lamp. It feels almost alive now, humming in the dark, waiting for him. He waits until the clock hits exactly 1 in the morning. The instant it does, he slides his card in. The screen hesitates. Then the same message appears. Balance unavailable at this time. The blind window has opened again. This time Dan does not move cautiously. He pushes the boundaries. He selects a transfer of $4,000 from his credit account, even though he knows it is impossible. The machine accepts the command without hesitation. No questions, no checks, no reality. Then he withdraws $2,000 in cash. The machine counts, clicks, whirs, and hands him the money as obediently as the night before. Dan feels his pulse rise. Something fundamental has shifted. He is no longer working within the rules everyone else must follow. He has stepped into a crack between systems, a place where normal logic does not reach. The next day, the bank reverses the imaginary transfer, creating a negative balance. But Dan has already predicted this. That night he returns and creates a bigger fake transfer to patch the hole before the system wakes. Night after night he repeats the process. Each time the numbers grow. 6,000, 12,000, 24,000. The loop becomes a machine, a private ecosystem that only he controls. In 3 short weeks, the impossible happens. He walks into a bank branch, trying to look calm, and the teller casually tells him his new balance. More than $1 million. The words hit him like a shockwave. He forces a nod, pretending to understand, but inside he feels electricity crackle through his chest. He steps into the sunlight outside the bank, stunned, breathless, aware that he has crossed a line he can never return from. He has discovered a secret doorway, a silent flaw, a midnight window that lets a bartender rewrite his financial reality. He should stop. Anyone else would stop. But Dan does not. Because once you find a hidden path the world never meant you to see, turning back feels impossible. And the doorway is still wide open. Once Dan saw the $1 million balance glowing on that bank screen, something inside him snapped loose. It was not greed at first. It was disbelief. Shock. A rush so intense it felt almost chemical. For 29 years he had lived as a man who counted every dollar. Now he walked down the street feeling like gravity no longer applied to him. The next days felt unreal. Dan booked his first private jet with the casual confidence of someone who had done it 100 times. The pilot glanced at him with mild suspicion, asking how a bartender could afford such a flight. Dan smiled and muttered something about crypto. The pilot nodded, because in 2011 that explanation felt like magic, wild but possible. Minutes later he was in the air, watching the Australian coastline blur beneath him as if the world were a movie designed just for him. When he landed in Bali, he checked into a cliffside villa with an infinity pool that looked like it flowed straight into the ocean. Staff carried his bags. People called him sir. Every gesture fed the illusion that this new life belonged to him. Dan drank champagne priced higher than his monthly rent from a year earlier. He did not sip it. He swallowed it without thinking, as if this had always been his life. And something strange happened. The more he spent, the more invisible the fear became. He told himself he deserved it. After all, he had not stolen from any person. He had stepped into a crack in the system, a doorway the world forgot to close. Why should he be punished for finding it back in Australia? He became a quiet legend. He walked into bars and people drifted toward him, not knowing why they felt drawn to him. Some recognized him from school and acted like they had been close friends. Others laughed at his jokes a little too loudly, hoping to be invited into his orbit. It was not the money itself. It was the aura, the confidence, the sense that he was living a life slightly bigger than reality. Dan paid off the tuition debts of a friend without being asked. He cleared another friend's loan after hearing a single complaint over drinks. He helped strangers who did not even know his last name. His generosity grew as fast as the numbers in his hidden loop. It made people adore him. And he loved that feeling. The warmth, the admiration, the sense of being needed. But beneath the glow of luxury, something darker began to rise. A quiet pressure. A whisper at the edge of his mind. At a crowded bar one night, his closest friend grabbed his wrist just as he reached for his card. The music thumped around them, but his friend's voice cut through everything. "I know what you are doing." The words landed like ice. Dan froze. His friend leaned closer, eyes filled with fear instead of judgment. "You are going to prison, and I cannot watch it happen." Then he walked away, leaving Dan alone in the noise. Dan swallowed hard and ordered the most expensive bottle on the menu. He told himself it was nothing, a warning, a misunderstanding. But the truth lingered, heavier than champagne, louder than the music. The fantasy he built so easily was beginning to crack. By early winter of 2011, Dan's world begins to tilt. The late-night parties, the expensive bottles, the easy confidence he once drowned himself in, all start to feel thin, like stage props around a man losing grip on the script. The thrill that once pushed him forward now coils into something tighter, colder, a quiet dread that sits just below the surface. Every morning he wakes with the same ritual. Check the phone, check the bank, check his name online. He types it slowly, adding words like investigation and fraud, bracing for the headline that will end everything. But nothing appears. The absence of danger should calm him, yet it only fuels his fear. Silence does not mean safety. Silence means the storm is building somewhere he cannot see. His hands begin to tremble at random moments. A glass slips. A card drops. He startles at every knock on the wall, every engine outside the window. The same man who once walked into five-star hotels without blinking now jumps at the sound of his own phone vibrating on a table. Still, night after night, he drags himself back to the ATM. The ritual that once felt like a secret superpower now feels like walking across thin ice. Each fake transfer makes his chest tighten. Each withdrawal feels like a countdown ticking louder in the dark. Then, one night, he reaches the edge. He cannot push the loop any further. He cannot keep living inside the blind hour, so he stops. For the first time in months, he lets the system see him with both eyes open. The next morning, reality hits with brutal speed. His account collapses into the negatives. Not a few hundred, not a few thousand, millions. A hole so deep his breath catches as he stares at the screen. The red numbers look unreal, like a warning from a world he never meant to touch. Panic takes over. Dan calls the bank, voice shaking as he tries to explain, tries to confess before everything gets worse. The manager listens for only a moment before answering with a sentence that freezes him in place. "Sir, this has been forwarded to the police." The call ends. Dan waits for the inevitable. He expects pounding at the door, sirens, footsteps, something, anything. But hours pass, then days, then weeks. No one comes. The silence becomes its own punishment, heavier than any arrest could be. It stretches into months, into seasons, until Dan realizes the truth. They are not ignoring him. They are watching, building a case in the dark, just as quietly as he once moved money through it. 2 years after the glitch, unable to breathe under the weight of waiting, Dan does the only thing left. He tells the world what he did. When Dan finally steps into the courtroom in 2014, he feels lighter than he has in years. Not calm. Not relieved. Just emptied out. The way a man feels after carrying a weight far too heavy for far too long. Reporters whisper his name. Prosecutors shuffle papers filled with numbers they barely understand. Even the judge asks twice for clarification on how someone could steal money that technically did not exist. Dan listens as the story of his own life is read aloud like a puzzle no one can solve. A bartender who slipped through a blind spot in the banking system. A man who took advantage of a glitch so strange it almost sounds like fiction. He stands there and accepts everything. The guilt, the confusion, the consequences. When the judge delivers the sentence, 1 year in prison followed by community corrections, Dan nods. It is lighter than he expected, and heavier than anyone else will ever understand. Prison is harsh, but it is simple. Clear rules, clear days, no waiting for footsteps, no sirens haunting the edge of his thoughts. For the first time since that night at the ATM, Dan sleeps. When he is finally released, he slips back into ordinary life with a quiet humility. He returns to a bar, ties on an apron, and starts wiping down tables as if he never left. On his first shift, a regular walks in, squints at him, and snaps his fingers in recognition. "You are that ATM guy, right?" Dan hesitates, then nods. The man smiles, reaches into his wallet and slides a 20 across the counter. "Here, this one is real. Best tip you will get today." Dan laughs, a real laugh, one that rises from a place untouched by fear or guilt. He pockets the 20 and breathes in the familiar smell of lime, wood, and spilled beer. It is not luxury. It is not power. But it is honest. And after everything, that feels like the richest life he could ask for. And if you want more stories like this, more hidden cases, more unbelievable true mysteries the world forgets to tell, make sure you subscribe. There are secrets everywhere, and we are just getting started.